Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first in the Auxiliary Markings Club's Second Tuesday Series, a monthly series where we will be celebrating auxiliary markings and labels in all of their forms. We're really glad you're here tonight, whether you're actually attending in person or whether you are listening later on. We hope that if you have any questions, you'll let us know. And we're delighted you're here. So tonight we have a wonderful program. Tom Fortunato is going to speak with us about his Titanic cover that missed the boat. And I can't wait to hear what that's about. So let's go on, just do a couple quick announcements. If you don't belong to the Auxiliary Markings Club already and you're coming as a guest, it isn't necessary to belong to the Auxiliary Markings Club to be part of this. However, if you would like to become a member, you can find the information on postal-markings.org. And in addition to four editions a year of our newsletter, which is a wonderful high-level publication dealing with auxiliary markings from across the globe. There are lots of other benefits that are available on the website. We like to think that this is about the best deal you can possibly get. A digital membership costs you $15 a month, and print memberships are $22. I also ask that if you don't follow us on social media, that please check out our YouTube channel, which you can find by searching Auxiliary Markings Club. That has our previous videos on it from over the last year. And then we also have a Facebook page which posts a new auxiliary marking or label every day of the year. And so I hope that you might have a look at those. So our presenter tonight is Tom Fortunato. Tom is from Rochester, New York, and has been a stamp collector since the age of 6, when a neighbor gave him a big bag of doubles and a red hardbound 1964 Scott's Worldwide Catalog from her deceased mother's collection. Unfortunately, no one in his family or friends collected stamps, so he taught himself the basics. Currently, Tom is a life member of the American Philatelic Society, American Topical Association, American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors, as well as the local Rochester Philatelic Association, with additional memberships in the Auxiliary Markings Club, Royal Philatelic Society of Canada, and several other philatelic groups. He's a dual APS and ATA National Accredited Judge since 2000, formerly active exhibitor specializing in thematics and modern philately. Tom continues to combine his philatelic and webmaster interests through those dealing with Dear Doctor postcards, various society sites, and the Titanic covers being presented this evening. Tonight's talk covers the 30-plus year trek uncovering the background of a rather plain-looking cover bearing a single but historically important auxiliary mark, Titanic. Found by Tom in 1986 in a dealer's box titled Better Junk at $10 each, his gamble has more than paid off in the postal history education he acquired, uncovering the story behind its travels and the collaboration with others from around the world to bring the pieces of this philatelic puzzle together. So Tom, I'll turn it over to you and thank you for doing this for us.
You bet. Let me go ahead and share my screen here with you all. And let me find out. Can you all see the screen? Hello?
Yes, we can.
All right. Let me see. I believe it's Control, Alt, and H to get rid of the... Nope. Okay. Well, I'm sorry if you're seeing the share part of the screen here.
No, I don't think we actually are. I think we're
You
just
see that? Okay, because I see that on my screen, but I don't want that interfering with you all there taking a look at the presentation. Well, good evening, and thank you very much for joining me tonight. I would ask you, if you would please, go ahead and mute yourself, but I would encourage you, if you do have questions along the way, to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. The particular style, if you will, that I put my presentations together are rather literal. You can, in fact, look at the presentation without me even saying a word, because most of the words are up on the screen, but I'm here to give some color commentary, if you will, and kind of augment some of the words which are there on the presentation tonight. But this is all about, I've titled this My Titanic Cover That Missed the Boat. I put this presentation first together for my local Rochester Philatelic Association group back in 22. I've gone ahead and updated it a bit as I've given the presentation a couple times, including tonight. So I've added some new things for you there as well too. Okay, let me go back. Well, here it is. This is the cover that kind of started it all back in 1986. As you heard in the introduction, this is something I found in a box, a dealer's box down in Elmira, New York, at a show in October of that year. Literally in a box that said "Better Junk." And I love junk boxes, and I think most of you probably do as well too. And I'm flipping through the various covers which are in there. Nothing really interests me except this rather dirty cover. Anytime you see the word Titanic, certainly that's got to set something off in your brain. But I looked at it a little closer and said, oh my, this has a receiving mark of March 1912. Stamp collectors in particular, I think, have a great interest in history. I kind of remembered that it was April of 1912 that Titanic set sail and also went under. And I said, how can that be a month before the Titanic? But here's a marking Titanic. I did realize that on occasion you're going to see covers that come across the ocean with a marking that denotes what ship carried that on. But wow, I saw this cover and said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and take a chance and go ahead and buy the cover for 10 bucks. What an investment it has been, not only on the financial side, but on the educational side, because this is kind of the start of my interest in postal history. I've been a worldwide collector up to this point, but this is really the first time I kind of delved into covers and what the markings were and learned a bit from it. Of course, RMS Titanic, the RMS stands for Royal Mail Steamship, and that is why it was built along with it.
Tom, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that's me. Were you able to hear the introduction?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. Okay.
Just the
Well,
last few sentences we missed.
oh, I'm sorry about that. Let me just kind of go back. Well, I just kind of mentioned a little bit about it was my start of learning about postal history because I had been a stamp collector up to that point, not really caring too much about covers, but this kind of sparked things going. So, as I mentioned, the cover itself is kind of ratty, but I've learned through the years to kind of figure out what all these markings were. And that's the first thing we're going to do here in the presentation, kind of look at the markings and kind of follow the trail that this cover took. So there are lots of markings on the cover, enough that literally you can map it on out where it went along the way. First thing that draws your attention to is kind of the scalloped postmark, which you see there. And I didn't realize at the time, but I've learned that kind of scallop postmark from France was actually used on train mail, something they call courier convoyeur train mail. It's set up something like the way that the U.S. Set up mail going from one place to another. But these particular trains, there were not clerks on board to actually postmark them. They were postmarked at the various stations that it went to, and then the mail was given to the people on the train. It went on its way and it went along the entire route. So this particular route was a short route, um, roughly 40 miles or so, from Char to, I believe it's pronounced Cercois line. It's the northwest of Paris, but you can see it here on the map. And I was able to find some nice postcards here that show exactly what the train stations looks at both of the terminus points here. There are some back stamp markings on this particular cover too. You can see them pretty clearly here. The earliest one is this Paris receiver mark that was at the main Paris post office. Here's a picture of the post office at 4:30 in the morning the following day, which was a Monday on the 4th of March, 1912. And you can also see here a Washington, D.C. receiving mark roughly a week later from there. I do have a calendar in the upper corner. You can kind of take a look again at the path. This was postmarked on the 3rd, wound up the following day on Monday the 4th, and then traveled about a week or so to cross the Atlantic. So the big question is, what really happened from the time that this was actually postmarked and ended up in Paris to the time that it arrived in Washington, D.C. And a lot of this was kind of supposition. Thank God for the internet, because it was through the internet that I've picked up a lot of information about crossings and other information to kind of put this piece of the puzzle together. It's taken me roughly 30 years since I found it. It's almost going to be 40 years now, and I just keep on adding information as I run across it. The letter itself is franked with standard kind of 25 centime postal rate. That is the surface rate from Paris to America. And overseas mail outbound went through France, was brought first to Paris, and then was prepared, bagged, and then brought up to the ports wherever the ship was that it's supposed to be going on to. Now, it is common practice, as I mentioned a few minutes ago there too, that sometimes you will see the name of a ship marked in some way through an auxiliary marking that designates which ship it's supposed to be going on. It's not always there, but sometimes it is. It's a little unusual that a Titanic marking was there, because it's my understanding that there were millions of pieces of mail that wound up on the Titanic's maiden voyage. I can't imagine that marking be on so many covers. That's still a bit of a question here, but as I continued to dig into this and ran across some other people around the world who have an interest in the Titanic in particular, and markings of covers and the rest, a gentleman I ran across from the Netherlands, David Van Dellen, saw what I had and said, "Oh, well, I kind of studied the Olympic, and look at this. The marking itself for the Olympic is very close to that of the Titanic." It was pretty interesting in that regards. Neither he nor I nor anyone else knows for absolutely sure where that ship name was applied to that letter. It could have been done at the central Paris collecting station, or it could have been done later at the ship's port of departure. We're not really sure in that regards. So there are various lines that, of course, cross the Atlantic. We're very spoiled with airplanes nowadays, but the ships of the time, of course, followed very similar routes with one another. Various lines had specific stops and routes to cross the Atlantic. And we have supposed that the letter itself would have left France at Cherbourg, and you can see that right here, it's underlined, if it departed on the White Star Line. This shows the various, as I mentioned, the various routes of the White Star Line as it would cross. Other transatlantic lines, other than the White Star Line, had their own routes that they traveled and their own stops along the way at their major ports. The North German Lloyd and the Hamburg American lines, they preferred Cherbourg as their port of departure. The French CTG line docked at Le Havre, and a little farther down in Bordeaux, as you can see here. Now, it was pretty common that once a ship had left its last port in Europe, for the most part, it would take about 5 days or so to cross the Atlantic, either to New York City. Baltimore was a port as well too that they would travel to. So we are assuming that the cover would take about 5 days leaving those major ports, assuming that there were no stopovers. Um, and the postmarks, which you'll see as far as the Washington receiving mark there on March 18th, you can see is the following Monday right here. Again, is a clue to help us figure out exactly what ship did it depart on. We are under the assumption, again, with that 5 days there, that the ship itself could have or should have left the last European port of call on or before Tuesday, March 12th. Shipping lines, their travels, their ports of call, and their points of departure, times of arrival were very clearly documented in most of the newspapers of the day. And there is a very nice website out there that you can go to. I believe it's still running right now. There's a link in the lower corner. The Morton Allen Directory of European Passenger Steamship Arrivals, covering ships that came on over between 1904 and 1926. Gives you a part of the chart, which is online here. So these are the various ships as they arrived in New York on or about between the 15th and the 17th of March. And from that, the most likely ship that carried that particular piece of mail was probably the Maine. It departed Cherbourg, North German Lloyd's Maine, traveling between Southampton, Cherbourg, and New York City. So we're going to summarize the path of this cover. Again, you can take a look at the calendar here as a reference. It was mailed on Sunday, March 3rd. It arrived Paris Sunday, March 4th at 4:30 in the morning. It was sent to the port of Cherbourg. I believe it left on the North German Lloyd's Maine somewhere around Tuesday, March 12th, arriving in New York City on Sunday, March 17th. Arrival in Washington, D.C. the following day, March 18th at 2 o'clock, and arrived at the business where this was mailed to on March 19th. But there's still lots of questions here. Some of the questions that you probably can think of as we travel along this presentation is, well, why was the Titanic marking on the cover? Are there similar covers? What kind of business was this letter sent to, and why was this Titanic cover saved? Well, again, the 30, 40-year trek in uncovering the answers, we do have some answers for you. The Olympic and Titanic, the two giant ships of their time, were built literally side by side in a shipyard in Belfast, Northern Ireland. They were very, very large ships, largest of their kind, and it was very much a learning process as both ships were built. Titanic's keel was laid on March 31st, 1909. It was 3 months after the smaller Olympic keel was laid. 15,000 men worked between the two ships. And interesting fact in reading some information about the building of these two ships, um, eight men were actually killed over the 3-year process. Interestingly, they had expected that about 15 or 16 men would be killed over this 3-year process as both ships were made. Interesting how they kind of thought that out in advance. interesting little tidbit. 2 years later, the Titanic was launched. It was a pretty big ship. This is an interesting image of it before the four stacks, which are very iconic, if you will, on the Titanic, were actually put on. VIP tickets were issued. Here's a sample of one of those VIP tickets during its launch on May 31st. It was far from complete, and as I mentioned, not only the smokestacks are missing, but a lot of the interior was still to be worked on as well, too. The Olympic was placed into service shortly after Titanic's launch itself happened. Its maiden voyage was in June 11th, 1911, from Southampton in Great Britain, stopped in Cherbourg, France, Queenstown, Ireland, and arrived in New York. That path may sound pretty familiar to you because the Titanic followed exactly the same route during its maiden voyage. Now, the White Star Line had announced its 1912 sailing schedule back in September of 1911. And the Titanic's maiden voyage was actually set for March 20th, as I mentioned, following the same route that the Olympic had taken. But there were some problems, primarily with the Olympic. The Olympic didn't only have one crash, it wound up with two. The first collision that it had was on a trip that it took across the Atlantic on September 20th with another vessel, the HMS Hawk. There's a picture of it, very vivid, showing the extent of the damage on both the Olympic, which isn't quite so bad, but the Hawks really got got plummeted from that. So back went the Olympic. They needed parts to put the Olympic back together again. So where they take it from? They went right next door to the Titanic as it was being built and literally cannibalized that for parts. The Olympic had a second collision about 5 or 6 months after that in February off the coast of Newfoundland. Same thing happened. It had to go back into dry dock as well too. More parts were cannibalized off of the Titanic, and in doing so, obviously the original sailing date of the Titanic had to be postponed because it simply would not be ready in time. So again, that Titanic maiden voyage was set to be March 20th. It was changed to April 10th, again because of delays of the Olympics trouble. So how is it that the Titanic marking got onto this cover? And the most plausible explanation here is that the French Postal Administration officials somehow missed the date of that change, decided to stamp some of the mail, send it on up to the port, and go from there. Could someone at the post office have missed that change of date, and they just didn't have the updated information in Paris that the shipbuilders had up in Belfast? It's a possibility. So are there similar covers to this? Well, again, this was in the age before the internet, and you really had to dig for information back then. I started looking for similar Titanic markings on covers in a literature search. And the first thing that I pulled up was a 1978 Machine Cancel Society forum article titled "The Sinking of the Titanic." And you can probably read um, enough of the article to kind of get an idea of what's what. The editor for uh, the publication from the Machine Cancel Society actually gave a present to this other gentleman who wrote the article, and there's a picture of it. And I looked at it, I was just completely flabbergasted because, well, what's there? Okay, it was mailed around the same time as my cover. The markings are all very similar, from the Titanic marking to the purple receiving mark, which is there, although this wasn't published in color. Some other strange 6 digits here, something called a dossier number here as well too. It even had a receiving mark from Washington, D.C., just like my cover. And I said, wow, this was an eye-opener. The article that the gentleman put together for the publication alludes to the fact that he was at one time part of a stamp club in a prison. In fact, in a prison that had a publishing wing or print shop there. And the supposition of the article is, well, somebody probably just put the words Titanic on there, and this is probably a bogus thing just to raise interest in what the heck was happening. That dampened my thoughts, but I said, well, there's got to be a little bit more to this story. As I mentioned, I was basically floored, and here are the two covers side by side. You can compare marks, you can compare dates. It was just eerily similar. The 6 digit number, that weird number here and over here, were separated just by 58 if you count numerically from one to the other. So there's got to be a connection here. There's more to the story, clearly. And how many other covers are there like this? Well, with the introduction of the internet and people throwing almost everything you can imagine on the internet, I started my search and began creating, in essence, a census of covers like this to prove, first off, that the cover itself is not a fake. There are others out there, and just try to prove the validity of what I have. I started writing articles about these, including one to a publication by um, Titanic enthusiasts around the world called the Titanic Commutator. Put together an article, said, here's what I know at this time. This is very early on. This is in the early 90s that I submitted that. And people started writing in and said, well, it could be this or this. Or, one guy in particular, an expert, a philatelic expert, as it happens to be, from Great Britain, wrote a very scathing article in a follow-up commutator publication that said these have to be faked. You have been swindled. You should have kept your $10 to yourself. And on he went. Well, okay. This is probably one of the most updated pages I put together in this presentation. As of January 2025, that's right now, I've uncovered 23 similar covers. And now I don't own them all. I still only own the one cover, but I've been able to track these down with a lot of help from people literally around the world, and auction houses and other people interested in the Titanic in documenting the histories of many of these. In fact, I've built a website that we'll take a look at in a little while here too, that is dedicated to them, where you can find all the information, background information, images, and kind of check all this stuff out yourself firsthand, including auction lots with prices realized over the years that I've been able to uncover for the various covers that you see here. I put together a massive table. This is an older copy. Don't let anybody know this is the older one. Listing the various covers. I've got them all numbered. I've tracked down what is a probable route where which ship would have carried them all over, the various dates and all the rest. It's all well documented, and would encourage you to take a look at this in particular when you get some time. Now, the Titanic marking that you saw on the majority of those covers all look the same. They're the same kind of purplish kind of ink that was used on them. They're all in a sans serif type font. They're all the same size, same shapes of the letters, all the rest there, except for a couple that we have found, or other people have found as well, that have the word Titanic on them. One of them here is a cover on the left from Spain. This was mailed in and around Barcelona or so. This was again mailed to that same company, the M.A. Winter Company in Washington, D.C. And then another cover showed up, which is extremely unique, mailed from Denmark with a totally different type of Titanic marking on it, as you see here, to an address that is not the M.A. Winter Company in Washington, D.C. This is very unique, and that is the only cover known that has been uncovered so far with a Titanic marking not mailed to that same company. So, what kind of business was this letter sent to? As I mentioned, all but one of those covers was sent to a company called the M.A. Winter Company in Washington, D.C. on U Street, if you happen to know where that is. The building itself was built in 1908. There's a picture of it there for $50,000 by a guy, obviously with the last name Winter, and a partner. These were two gentlemen who were in a business dealing with medicines. Um, and I say medicines with kind of a question mark at the end because a very well-known publication in Great Britain, which is still around today, called The Lancet, proclaimed that both the M.A. Winter Company and its wonderful medicines are unworthy of serious consideration, comparable in essence to snake oil and snake oil salesmen. There were some very questionable medications that this company put out. But again, we're talking about the early part of the 1900s. Uh, I guess you kind of have to expect that at that particular time. Now, let's talk about those 6-digit numbers that are found on the various covers here. Um, Earlier mail that was sent to the companies, again, these predate the Titanic cover by a year or two offhand, also have that a 6-digit number, either scribbled somewhere on the cover itself, or stamped, as my examples happen to show. And you'll see that you can't really tell by the numbers whether they're in sequence or not. But as it turns out, these docket numbers were in essence applied by the mail clerks when they received the mail. They stamped a unique number or wrote a unique number on the envelope itself and put that same number on the correspondence inside, just so that they can tie and say this one matches this. This letter was definitely with this particular mail piece, for example. And this changed between 1910 and 1911 from the handwritten to that hand stamped. Now, both the pieces here too have a similar purple receiving stamp by the company. That obviously didn't change, except they changed the particular information on that date that was received. So a little bit of evidence there as well too to kind of validate what's what. Now, why was the Titanic cover, not only mine, but all these others, why were they saved? How did they come about? What happened? Well, as you can imagine, after the Titanic sank, it was big news then. It's still big news now, for that matter, as well, too. The novelty of a Titanic marking on an envelope may have simply saved it from destruction, because it was pretty obvious that these letters, at one time by the Winter Company, were stored and just kept for in envelope files. Don't know for how many years or over what period of time. How they escaped from there, not really known. Whether they might have been purloined by some workers there, or if they were disposed of when the cabinets got too full and the rest. We really don't know that part of the story. They could have been hoarded by winter employees and kept as souvenirs. They could have been sold to philatelic shops, maybe just to try to sell them and get rid of them. We don't really know. There's something called a dossier number, which we'll see written on all the pieces of mail, the earlier ones as well as the ones that have Titanic. And that mystery was solved by a gentleman in the Netherlands who figured out that this particular company, the M.A. Winter Company, put in ads in publications to try to recruit salespeople to sell their medications overseas and here in the U.S. as well too. And what he was able to figure out in a Dutch American paper from 1911, it clearly stated on here in this ad, and I know you can't really read it all that well, but they insist so that they can keep track of all of this. Please write this dossier number somewhere on your envelope, and that dossier number actually deals with the ad that solicitation was published in, so that they can kind of backtrack it. Oh, this came from that newspaper or from that magazine. It was just a marketing ploy, if you will, by M.A. Winter to find out how successful some of their ads were. That's that dossier number, which you can read there. The French in particular were prone, well, I wrote prone to the recruitment scheme, but they were probably suckers, I guess is the best way to put it in some cases here, because Jerry also found an excerpt here in this case, again, clearly stating that that dossier number must be written. Here's how to fill out your envelope in responding if you want to become a salesman for us here, and clearly write that dossier number here. Be sure to write that particular number from your folder on the same envelope, because we instruct the clerk in charge of our mail to look for your number that will carry this personal number, etc., etc., etc. Again, all part of a marketing ploy so they can track where these people read about them. So most of the 23 covers or so were mailed in plain envelopes, but a couple of them were business envelopes of one kind or another. One of those interesting, probably one of the most interesting here, is an importer of coal, which you'll see here. You'll find this is the cover from Spain. This is a harness maker, someone who dealt with leather goods and things like that for harnesses for horses, etc. That was kind of interesting to uncover that. So basically, to summarize, here's what I've got. There are multiple Titanic covers. They've been found, putting initial rebuttals to rest that they were intentionally manufactured. We haven't proven that. The theory exists why the Titanic markings was used before the ship actually sailed. We think we know the answer to that. The probable crossings, in fact, I've got to update that. Sorry, I have the old number of 21 known covers, that's 23 now, have been researched and documented based on those various markings and the transatlantic routes of the ships of the time. All of the winter cover markings have been explained, and there is now at least a plausible reason why so many of the winter covers have been are still around and still survive. So this is basically the end of the presentation itself. What I will do, I'll kind of close this on down. I'll take you to the website that I built up on this, invite you to take a look at it anytime that you want. It's easy to remember URL. It's titaniccovers.com. And there's a lot of information there. I'll just take you through very briefly a little bit of that. Let me go ahead and unshare my presentation at this point. Okay, are you all still there? Good. Okay, we're able to hear everything okay. All right, let me open it up for any questions you folks happen to have right now. Any thoughts?
Tom, what's the, I couldn't see when you had your kind of summary of it up. What's the date range for the covers that have the Titanic markings on them?
Yep, I'll tell you the best thing to do that. Let me go ahead and share another screen with y'all. Let me see here. We're roughly talking about a week and a half between the times, the dates of the postings of these. Let me see if I can pull that screen up. Just a moment. Let me go here. Let me go here. All right, let me see if I can share this screen. And okay, can you see this screen now?
Yes.
Okay, this is my website. Again, it's titaniccovers.com. I'm going to go to my chart because a summary chart is available. If you click on that, and let me see if you can see that. Can you see my screen that shows the summary chart at this point?
Yes.
Okay, let me see if I can blow this up big enough so you can kind of make out some dates here. Do 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 do. Okay. Let me see. Let's increase that. Oh, come on. Let me move this out of the way. Hang tight. Let me see if I can increase the size of that here. Blow it up a little bit, and you can see the postmark dates of these covers that are together range from around March 2nd, March 3rd, all the way to March 14th. And I got the dates which are on there. Taking you through at least a couple of these, you'll see line items for the postmark date, the country of origin, the city or town where that particular piece was mailed from, the sender's return address. Again, most of them don't have one, but a couple of those business envelopes, of course, did. The various dates and markings, which you'll see there. The research that I've done to try to figure out what potential ship actually carried those mail pieces on. The receiving mark, both from the postmark from Washington, D.C., and also from the Winter Company, and some general information about who uncovered a particular cover, who found the cover, who reported the cover to me, and a little bit of the history on the cover. You'll see that for each of them. I've tried to organize these by numbers, somewhat somewhat based on the dates of when they were actually mailed. A few are out of place offhand, but
Mhm.
only one of them has an unreadable date on it, by the way. Let me close that chart on down. I'll take you through it. This is a summary that I put on the website that just kind of explains again the various markings and how to interpret them that you'll find on these Titanic covers. Up above, you will see a front and a back of just about all of them. If you just click on one of them, you'll see the back. You'll click the front. If you want a larger blow up, click either F for front or R for the reverse. You'll see a much larger sample of each of them. Little bit of history about when it might have been offered last at auction or who found it. Um, you'll see a variety of prices on these as far as when they were auctioned off. And I'll take you down to that auction section down just a little bit below. Just some reference information, some articles that I had found on the various publications. Let me take you to the auction section. This is probably the more interesting part because as part of the census, I've been able to track when were these first in the philatelic marketplace. How much did they go for? Were they sold? Were they unsold? I found some information on them. You will see that in some cases they were not sold. They were put up at auction and no bidders. And the most recent piece for example, which is quite eye-opening. A cover was submitted to eBay not too long ago, about 6 months ago or so. The correspondent found a cover again in a junk lot that he had bought out in Colorado. He got a hold of me. We exchanged a couple emails back and forth. He said, "Well, I want to put this up for sale. What do you think I should put this up for?" I said, "Well, if you're looking to sell it, they've gone from a couple $100 up to a couple $1,000 each." So he put an initial bid of $2,500 on there, and there was a bidding war for this particular cover. It sold for over $10,000 on eBay. That was just a couple months ago.
Hmm.
Kind of interesting. Kind of interesting. Kind of makes me wonder if I should be selling my cover offhand or not. But he was, I think, quite fortunate with a bid of $10,000 on that. But again, more reference material there that you can go to any time and take a look at, including the image that I used on my title page was actually from a 1911 Danish brochure advertising the sailings of the of both vessels, for that matter. And of course, I had to include one of the actual postmarks of something that was on the Titanic. This is one of the only pieces that survived because it left the boat in Ireland when it made its stop in Ireland, leaving Southampton. And that's a hell of a nice piece there offhand. I've got a variety of additional links and resources there, and decided to put some nice cancellations down at the bottom that were used during the 100th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. So again, you can go take a look at that anytime you want and dig into this a little more if that might be of interest to you. But it's a heck of a story. It's now almost 40 years since I found this. And I've learned a hell of a lot about covers and postal history in digging through everything about this one cover. You just never know what you're going to uncover yourself, especially in a junk box, even if it did cost $10 at the time. Let me stop.
Tom, hi, this is PK from Bangalore, India.
Yes, hey, how are you?
Absolutely doing good, thank you. I also have a personal connection with Rochester. My son lived there from 2007 until December last year, and I
Oh,
was
wow,
visiting
great.
twice every year. Anyway, he's moved to Madison, Wisconsin. Thank
Ah,
you, absolutely fantastic talk. Just putting a skeptic hat on for a minute, it struck me that almost all the mail is to the Winter Company. Is
yes.
it just, it very often commercial enterprises would just collect all the mail they receive, the covers, and at some stage they would sell large lots to dealers,
Absolutely.
etc. So is it just possible that somebody got hold of this lot of covers with the proper, stamps, cancellation dates, the received cachet, everything except the Titanic mark,
Hmm.
and then just went putting the Titanic stamp, the one which is the sans serif mark on 23 of these covers that you found. And the reason I say this is, you see, if the Titanic stamp was genuinely applied in France, there would be literally tens of thousands of covers, bearing this mark. Why only covers addressed to the Winter Company?
I
So
don't.
my question really is, I mean, how credible is this entire story? And forgive me for sort of sounding very
That's all
negative.
right.
You've done excellent research.
No, yeah, I understand the skepticism. And we all kind of thought that as well too, until the other Titanic cover marks showed up. The other two different styles. Why would there be Titanic marks from Spain and Denmark? Covers originating there with the Titanic on it. Um, is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. If the covers could only talk, we'd love to find out the full story behind it. Um, it's mostly still supposition, but you just try to get as much evidence as you can to validate it.
Thank you.
Nope, but I understand completely. Just like that gentleman who wrote the article shortly after the Titanic article I put together had skepticism. I understand completely.
But less vitriolic, I hope.
Oh, yes, very much so.
Tom, that's an amazing presentation. Your 40 years of research are quite remarkable. My thought is that if the post office is trying to manage the mail, they have to decide which ship they intend to send mail to.
Right.
So when they're sitting in France, I assume the post office has to sort of look at the schedule and say, well, takes this many days to get to the ship. And so this week, probably Titanic's the best bet. And we'll send this bundle of mail to the Titanic, and next week it'll be a different one. And obviously their records were incomplete and they didn't know that it had been delayed a month. So it certainly makes sense to me that you'd get a cluster of dates 7 days before sailing coming out of France, and they would get a similar marking on them. Maybe at some point they consolidate the bundle that's going to that ship, and so they all get the same marking. That all makes good sense to me. The other thought was regarding the dossier that you mentioned. It occurred to me this is very common in advertising, that typically the way it's done is not to try to force you to put a dossier mark, but rather just to simply say, my address is Douglas Quine, box 23, LINN. And actually, my box number is just plain old 23. The LINN is the magazine I ran the ad in.
Yeah.
And I can remember as a kid, Popular Science, all the classified ads, there would be letters after the box number, and they were obviously Popular Science, and maybe the issue number of Popular Science. So there's a simpler way that merchants can do it without having to try to coerce people. They just make it sound like it's their actual address.
Yep. No, that's a very good point. This, I guess, was the technique that they kind of decided on to try to match everything with one another. But you're right too. I mean, I think one of the bigger questions is that's still outstanding. Where was that Titanic mark stamped? Was it stamped in the post office in Paris, or did they simply send it up to a dockyard and it was actually marked there before it made the ship? Or okay, 3 days before this ship goes, let's start marking some of that. But again, the other question too, PK, as you point out, why aren't there a lot more markings from other places with the word Titanic on it? Well, don't forget this was a month before the sinking of the Titanic. Getting a piece of mail with the name of a ship on it, okay. I guess unless somebody really knew about the Titanic being the largest vessel of its kind going to be coming over. This was a month before the sinking. So they could have been thrown out, or at least kept together by the company. But again, still a lot of questions, but we just try to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
Well, I would think that given the fact there were companies that held on to their mail after the fact, I mean, by the time, I suspect they were kept in the company records well beyond the sinking of the ship. So by the time they're purging the files, because these are obsolete records, at that point, that would have been something worth holding on to. Whereas all the ones that went on the Maine and the other ships,
Who cares?
they threw out.
Yeah.
It may sound like you need to find some winter covers without Titanic markings.
Well, I have found them. The
Okay.
ones from a year or two beforehand are winter covers. I'm always looking for winter covers before
Okay.
and after as well too, just to kind of figure what. But I did have two of them in the presentation here. That's kind of how some of the markings were proven that they withheld the test of time, and something a process the Winter Company had for at least a couple years beforehand. 1910, 1911 for sure. Yeah.
Great. Well, I couldn't agree more, Tom. It was a really fascinating presentation, and it just goes to show you really have to look at, I mean, I know you found this one in a box, but you really do have to look at what you have in your collection. Sometimes we have no idea what's there, and clearly the person who put this in the dollar box had no idea. So a really, really first-rate presentation and great research. So it's always good to see that, and thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Thank you all for coming. I just want to remind
Enjoyed
you,
it.
just one
got it.
second here. Sorry, I have to share my screen. Just a minute. He says confidently, believing that it may actually be here. All right. Well, for some, oh, I see it. Okay, there we go. I just wanted to remind you that we will be having these once a month on the on the second Sunday, second Tuesday of the month. And our next presentation is going to be with Gary Lowe, former editor of the American Philatelist and someone who's known to all of us. He's done a number of series for the APS on auxiliary markings, and he's going to be doing a talk on JOSCOM marks, which are airline marks that indicate how far something is gone or where it's no longer possible to send it by airline. And he's been doing a great deal of work on that. So I hope you'll join us for that. And thank you again for coming tonight. And we'll look forward to seeing you in the future on another broadcast of this on this series. Okay, and thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done.